Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. I'm not going to need 30 minutes or 25 minutes, I don't think. So, but keep it timing, and I'll try to respond to a couple of Mr. Grady's comments too, and may be helpful to you all. So, good morning. My name is Tanner Nichols. I'm an attorney at FPT Gibbons, a law firm that's representing a potential developer here in Mason County. Most of you have likely seen me at the other meetings, and I spoke at the December 9th public hearing of the Joint Planning Commission that they held at the community college. And so I recognize a lot of the faces here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak again this morning. First of all, I want to say thanks to the JPC and George and their effort and all that they've done. As the judge pointed out, they're unpaid volunteers. And it's amazing work that they do. They really dug in and studied the process. The JPC visited site locations, looked at other communities' work. They looked at the other communities' regulations, and have been able to present you all a robust recommendation. I can see the binder, right? It's a big binder of stuff that they looked at and put together. And that's why we're here today. I also want to say that Mason County is a pretty amazing place. I'd never been to Maysville and Mason County prior to my visits, and so when they talk about up on the hill or then down on the river, I know what that means now, certainly. But obviously Mason County is much more than the JPC and the fiscal court and the judge. It's the people, right? It's the schools, the churches, the businesses, and all the things that make Mason County great. And that's why my client wants to plant roots here. I've worked all over the state of Kentucky, and I can tell you that this place has been welcoming. I've had conversations with my wife and family, and Jack from Stantec. He works all over the country for data center developers, and he said, this place, they treat you better. And so what I would say is, although people in this room disagree, they're not disagreeable. So, and I thank you all for that and how you've treated me. And I also want to remind everybody here that this is the first part of the process. We're doing the text amendment here. There's still going to be, if my client wants to come here and put in a data center, we are going to have to go through a map amendment process. So we're just putting in the rules in place for and I think most of the people here, and I heard a lady come up and said, I'm not against data centers. And I think most of the citizens here would agree that zoning and local regulations should not be designed to stop progress or development, but to put the rules in place for orderly plan development for local communities. And so the word that I use is guardrails. And so that's what we're trying to do. Zoning in many ways is a political process. Right? You get input from the community, but ultimately elected officials have to make decisions. And these officials have to weigh the arguments that the change will come with future development. So some people will say, these are bad things. And then other side will say, but listen, we get all this other stuff with it. And you all have to weigh those. I think it's safe to say that not everybody's going to be happy, right, with the results today or possible results of future development. The county and county officials have to weigh the impact of future development with the benefits to the community at large. In a vacuum, I don't think anyone would disagree that selling real estate for prices that they would have never expected to get is a bad thing for those families, those potential sellers. It could be a life-changing windfall to some of these families. I've heard at other public meetings, people would get up at the public meeting out at the community college and say, we're not opposed to those people selling. We don't blame them. And so we don't think that's a bad thing. We don't know the situation of every family. This money of selling their potential farms, that could bring generational change to those families. Would it be a bad thing if we had a couple of thousand construction jobs for the county? I don't think so, right? I think most of you agree that would be a good thing. What about infrastructure improvements? What if the county had money to invest in water treatment or roads and sewers? I think most people would say, in the vacuum, that's a good thing. Increased tax revenues for the schools or public safety and roads. What about 100 new tech jobs, permanent tech jobs for local citizens? For young people to get those jobs and they wouldn't have to drive to Cincinnati or Lexington. I think all of these are obviously good things that have to be weighed by public officials. Now we have to look at the language. So you all have a red line of what my client thinks of the text amendment and the changes that we want. I've heard several comments at the JPC that they said that the text amendment needs to be best in class. And I certainly understand that sentiment. But let's look more closely at the practical steps and effect of that seemingly simple, appropriate language of best in class. When George or any of the county officials, the county planning officials at any other location, when they start drafting new text amendments, where's the first place they go? Probably if they're like me, right, they go to Google and they type in data text amendments and they start looking at other counties and they go online and review the language from other jurisdictions. That's what I did. Probably what you all have done too. He likely reviewed text amendments from across the country, but he looked at urban areas. He looked at places where they treat all industrial development the same. They may not necessarily say, oh, data centers have to do this, but a power plant has to do this, or an industrial manufacturing plant has to do this. They say if it's in this, they have a list of uses, and if it's in that zone, it's allowed, and they all follow the same rules. But here's also something important. He probably pulled it when Mr. Grady talked about Frederick, the DC area, and those particular, they had this big giant report. Likely, I don't know, but likely that had a big staff. It wasn't one person. George is a staff of one for the whole county of Mason County. And so, it may have had a planning staff of 50 people. So you're looking at an ordinance and looking at studies that has a huge staff. So he may have taken a piece from Ohio or Washington, D.C., or Arizona or Colorado, and then he puts those all together. While we think this proposal is a good start, in my experience, there are a few items that need to be reviewed more closely to understand the impact on development. Because there can be explicit moratoriums. So some counties can just say, we don't want data centers at all. But in other places and other uses, you can end up with a moratorium but not be explicit about it. If your rules either are so strict or the setbacks are so big, you put developers in a situation where they can't, essentially you are putting a moratorium on the development. And the other thing that you have to consider is sometimes we always say developers just need to know the rules, but then there are times when you put stuff in the rulemaking that it's too risky for a developer to come out because they can't plan for the outcome. So if they say give a report, but the city or the county has never reviewed a report like that, then we don't know how the city or the county is going to react to that report. And so some developers would say, well, what have they done with reports in the past? Well, they don't have a history of that, so we don't know. So an example would be, what if the technical requirements that you have in the text amendment scientifically just can't be met? An example would be generators. We know noise is going to be a big issue. And it was a big issue at the JPC, and it's a big issue now. But if the generators, if a place like a data center has to use a generator during emergencies, they don't make generators silent now, right? And everybody knows if you have a generator at your home, typically they make noise. And so if you make a rule that just technically can't be met, then that is a sense putting a moratorium on the development. So we have to look at those more closely. And then the requirements that are typically handled by other parts of government are experts with experience. George is the sole zoning administrator here. In other places, you may have environmental experts, he may have like the staff, they'll have a staff of 10 people that will review specific items. And so what we suggest is for items that are more typically reviewed by state regulatory bodies or federal regulatory bodies, USA County should allow them to issue those permits and do their work. Don't put that on George and the local officials. We believe that the community is protected by those long-standing processes that are usually handled by state and federal regulatory bodies. Okay, let's go now to the specific text amendment. You all should have, and I think does it say Tanner at the top?
Yes, in my bad handwriting.
Okay. So let me go back. This is a good time to address, I think, Mr. Grady's. I don't think we have a dog in this fight necessarily, but his issue with not having a public hearing for development plans already in I-3, I think that can be easily fixed by putting a statement that all data centers, regardless of the zoning, has to come before the Planning Commission for a public hearing for a data center. So we're not opposed to that position at all. It's my understanding that there's not a lot of I-3 available in the county. So that's not really what the public and the people here are most concerned about. I think they're most concerned about what they anticipate will be a large swath of land that's going to be converted from agriculture to I-3 for the data center. But I think we're okay with that. The first red line. So this red line that you all see are my changes are pretty much the same red line that we had originally presented. So this is not new. The only thing that's new is we had to make a few changes because the JPC has 4 versions. They are on their 4th version. And so the original red line that I submitted on December 9th, it had to be updated based upon the changes that the JPC made. So let's see, the first one, principal structure. So the change there, we just want the principal structure. For hyperscale data centers, it's going to be a big building, right? So it would look like, in some ways, like an Amazon building on the outside. But on the inside, there's going to be lots of computer equipment and servers. And then the other kind of main part of those data centers are the cooling equipment that are on the outside of the buildings. And so when you all visited, you all can see that. And so all we're asking is to include that mechanical equipment cooling structures, add that as a principal structure. So it's kind of a cleanup, and that also goes to the setbacks. So when we're tying that into the setbacks. And so if you look over on the next page to the setbacks, when we talk about the setbacks, we're saying that it applies to the data center principal structures, and it shouldn't apply to the accessory structures. A data center campus, they may have a guardhouse. They may have some other smaller accessory structures those aren't the structures that make the noise. Those aren't the things. And so we don't think those should be included. There should be a carve out for those. The height structure, the structure height, already in the code, in in the ordinance in the code 406.4, there are some exceptions for some carve-outs that don't apply to the height, and we're just asking for a clarification that electric poles don't apply to the 75-foot height. We know that data centers use power, and that's one of the reasons we want to be here. The client wants to be here because of EKPC, and so they're going to have power poles that provide power to the plant, to the structures. Buffering and screening. I think the JPC did a good job of that. We want some carve-outs, or we need some carve-outs during construction. At the beginning, when we start building, if we get approval and we can start building, there are going to be some things during construction that, for noise and dust, we're going to have to abide by the existing regulations, but construction, it's going to be a lot of dirt moving. And so we need some of that. Some of the measurements, like in that first on page 3, I think it's just, I don't know how we measure air. So, some of that stuff needs to come out. It's just a cleanup. On the landscape buffer, we've asked that clearly where we have entrances, we don't have to have a buffer because we're going to have roadways coming in. The buffer's not going to go. And we need to allow the buffer to meander, to follow the topography. And we ask for a little leeway there. And then finally, if we have existing vegetation and trees, if we can use that as part of the buffer, we don't want to have to take it down and have new plantings. And so we're asking for the language to allow for that. We think that's pretty common sense. Noise, obviously, was a big, it's going to be a big issue for the Planning Commission, for you all to consider. We've looked at a lot of different places on the noise, and we think the noise levels here is certainly acceptable to my client, and we think it's good. We like the noise. We don't think that the noise, we need to carve out for construction activities. Some of that, you're just going to have trucks and bulldozers moving dirt. Typical construction, it's going to be a much bigger project, but there needs to be a carve out for those construction activities. And so, post-closing, pre-closing noise analysis. Here's how it typically works. The client at a zoning hearing has to come forward with a noise study. And the science allows them to say, when the building's built like this, and when we use this type of equipment, this is how much noise it will make. It's science, right? It's math and science. This is how much noise it will make. And at 500 feet, this is how much it will have. And at 750 feet, this is what the sound level will be. And so we will provide that report. As far as post-closing and after that, citizens and George and anybody will be able to challenge those. There is a mechanism, and all by just saying it's violating the ordinance. And they call up George or write George a letter and say, we think this is too loud. I've got my little phone, my little phone app, and I don't know how accurate those are, but people have them, and they're standing at their lot line, and they're saying this is too loud. And they send George a letter, and then George, whoever the owner of the property and the developer of the property is, would then have to say, that's not accurate. Look, we have an expert that shows you what the sound is. And then, so there is a mechanism already built in to your ordinance without anything here. And so we don't need the post-closing study. Citizens are protected just through the normal course. Finally, I talked about it earlier, the generators. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an engineer. My clients, engineers and scientists said the language where it says generators must adhere to the sound levels during emergency use. My engineers said that can't be. Right? And so what you're saying, well, how do we protect them? Well, first of all, during testing, I don't think there's going to be an issue. I think we can abide by it. Because if you've got 100 generators, they're not going to test them all at the same time. They're going to do those in cycles, 10 or 20 at a time. But during emergency uses, they may have to run all 100. And it may not meet the 50 decibel sound level. But I can say two things. These data centers have to have power. And so they have to have the generators because they can't go down. But they build in redundancies with the power company. So there's going to be redundancies. So that makes it less likely that they would ever be a power outage to the data center. And even if they do have, like my client has said, at other locations, the total running time of emergencies for the year might be 4 days for the entire year. And that's not 4 days at a time, it's 6 hours here, 6 hours there, but for a total of 4 days in the year. So we're talking very little. And if the data center's power's out, the neighbor's power is going to be out likely too, right? And so those neighbors are probably running generators. And if they have a generator running at their own home, they're not going to hear generators 1,000 feet away. So that's just from a practical point. Let's see, design standards. Section I. I think what we said is we'll adhere to all the visual screening and noise requirements, but the project must have the ability to control how they design the layout. So we remove that section about that the structures have to be to the side and the rear of the principal structure. Well, we don't have the final layout yet, but when we lay out the buildings, we have to have the ability to put those side yards and those air conditioners or those cooling mechanisms in the most efficient place. And so having that decided ahead of time makes it difficult for developers. Let's see. The development plan. So maybe, is that L, section L? Mm-hmm. Jack, will you come up here? Do you mind coming up here? Jack Ammerman from Stantec, who's part of our team. He's the engineer. And so the reason we changed, it looks like we changed a lot in the development plan. But if you go down through there and see all of the listings, it just looks, it's red and blue, but there's a lot of overlap of the same thing. And so this is what we're proposing, I think, is what's common in everywhere I've been. Jack's all over the country. And so what we're really trying to get at is, at the site plan and at the development phase, you don't typically have full construction drawings. You have kind of preliminary drawings. You don't go into detail about exactly where all the electric lines run and the like you've seen that, right? It almost looks like a blue. It's the difference between when you first look at a book for building a home and you just look at the outline plan of what the home will look like, and then you hire an architect, and then at the end though they get into the construction drawings. And so that's what we're trying to do here, is just saying, hey, we're providing everything that that the Joint Planning Commission needs for a site plan, but we shouldn't have to give you full construction drawings.
Yeah, if I may, Jack Hammerman with Stantec. I'm a licensed civil engineer in the state of Kentucky as well as many other states. I lead and manage a team currently around 80 individuals, plus others that work on these types of projects all over North America. I've lived in this world for the last 5 years. Started my career doing commercial retail where we were doing McDonald's, right? So projects of this size and scale, it takes a massive amount to get to the level of detail that you're looking at in this current ordinance. And so the intent of a planning rezone is to show you that the engineering is feasible, that we can meet the planning requirements, the setbacks, the area, the lots. The engineering will be reviewed at the time of the permit by those correct authorities. So a simplified and 30% or preliminary submittal just shows, yes, we can do the engineering and we'll get there, and that'll be reviewed later. And that is common in my entire career, whether it's a McDonald's, an apartment building, or a large-scale project like this. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. I went a lot longer than I thought. On the utility plan, again, it looks like we've taken a lot of out. But I think ultimately what we're proposing is exactly what everybody wants. We're saying we will, at the zoning map amendment, we will give you a letter from the local utilities to say, a will serve letter, right? That we have the capacity, we'll go and we'll have to present a letter to the Planning Commission to say, hey, if they build this data center, we have enough capacity on the grid to be able to supply power, and we'll do that for water and electric. And so, really, I think we've simplified it by saying that's what we'll provide. And we don't have to go through all that. We just have to provide you a letter, and your utilities are going to tell us that. We're not going to. They're going to have to tell it. The last two, kind of, and you can see the environmental impact. We're going to have to do this. Any permits, we're going to have to get all state and federal water, environmental permits. But this goes to what we talked about, George being a man of one. Do you really want him? I don't think he's an environmental expert. And in fact, at some of the JPC meetings, he said, oh, they provide the report, it's kind of like a check box. I check it off. So he's not necessarily even reviewing that. I mean, I know he's reviewing it, but he doesn't have, I don't think he's a water engineer or water quality expert, and so we're going to have to do that, and you can even put it in the text amendment. I mean, we're going to have to get that no matter what, and you can make that a requirement that we show it, but just know that that's all, you're already covered and the citizens are protected. Community impact. Somebody brought up. The judge has been working with this developer for a long time. The state of Kentucky and Frankfort have been working with this developer. There are going to be community development agreements. That's who should handle them. George and the zoning and the JPC, that's not really their bailiwick, right? That's not what the community impact and economic development is not, that's not where their expert lies. The economic development people should handle the community aspects. And that's the language that I put. The complaint procedures. Decommissioning plan. Again, I've taken out most of it because this is not like a solar project. A decommissioning plan here, these are buildings. These are buildings, and first of all, we don't think they're going to go dark. We don't anticipate that. And so we don't think it's appropriate for us to have a decommissioning plan when they're not in anything except solar, which can go back to farmland. These are buildings. And then the complaint procedure, George, just through the normal complaint procedure, people can call in like I talked about with the noise. They don't need a special complaint procedure. Mr. Grady talked about the $500 and they were opposed to that. And so by putting in this new complaint procedure, it's really, it's unneeded. And so we would be okay with removing it, but if it stays in, we think it should be handled through priority.
Sorry. Sort of a rude way to end it.
I apologize.
Well done, thank you.